I stood frozen in my music room doorway, staring at what used to be my most treasured possession. My 1959 Gibson Les Paul Standard lay in pieces across the hardwood floor, its beautiful sunburst finish cracked like a broken heart. The neck had snapped clean and half-strings curled and twisted like dying snakes around the wreckage. 12-year-old Tommy, my sister's son, stood over the destruction with a satisfied grin, still holding the baseball bat he'd used as his weapon of choice. Outside, I could hear the family barbecue continuing in our parents' backyard, laughter and conversation floating through the afternoon air, completely unaware that my $10,000 inheritance from Grandpa Jake had just been murdered. My legs felt weak as I knelt beside the destroyed guitar, my hands trembling as I tried to piece together fragments of what had been my grandfather's most prized instrument. The same guitar that had taught me everything I knew about music, the one that launched my career as a session musician and sound engineer here in Denver. I could still remember Grandpa Jake's weathered fingers guiding mine across these very strings when I was barely 8 years old, showing me how to bend notes just right to make them cry. "Tommy, what did you do?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The kid just shrugged, swinging the bat like he was ready for another round. It was making weird noises when I hit it. Mom said I could explore anything I wanted in here. I felt my blood turn cold. "Your mom said what?" Before Tommy could answer, Sarah appeared in the doorway, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the afternoon sunlight streaming through my studio windows. My sister had always been the golden child, the successful real estate agent who married Marcus, the wealthy car dealership owner. She took one look at the scene and let out an exaggerated sigh. "Oh, Nelson, it's just a guitar. Tommy didn't mean any harm." She placed her manicured hand on her son's shoulder protectively. He was just being curious the way children should be. "Just a guitar." I stood up slowly, pieces of my grandfather's legacy still clutched in my palms. "Sarah, this was Grandpa Jake's 1959 Les Paul. It's worth $10,000, but more importantly, it's irreplaceable. He taught me everything I know on this instrument." Sarah rolled her eyes dramatically. "You always were too attached to material things, Nelson. Grandpa Jake would want you to care more about family than some old piece of wood." The rest of the family began filtering into my music room, drawn by our raised voices. Mom and Dad appeared, first followed by my girlfriend Jessica, who taught kindergarten and understood children better than anyone I knew. Tommy continued swinging his bat casually, as if destroying someone's most precious possession was just another fun afternoon activity. "What's all the commotion about?" Dad asked, adjusting his reading glasses as he surveyed the damage. "Tommy accidentally broke Nelson's guitar," Sarah explained smoothly, emphasizing the word accidentally, like she was reading from a script. "But Nelson's making a big deal out of it instead of understanding that children need to explore and learn." Jessica stepped closer to examine the wreckage, her teacher's instincts immediately recognizing something was wrong. "This wasn't accidental," she said quietly. "Look at the impact patterns. Someone deliberately struck this guitar multiple times with significant force." "He's just a child," Sarah's voice rose defensively. "Children don't understand the value of things the way adults do. They learn through touching and experiencing the world around them." Mom nodded sympathetically toward Sarah. "Your sister's right, honey. Tommy didn't know how much that guitar meant to you. You should be more understanding." I felt my world tilting off its axis. Here I was, surrounded by my own family, and they were defending the destruction of my most cherished inheritance. The guitar that had gotten me through the dark months after Grandpa Jake died from cancer when I was 16. The instrument that had helped me build my recording studio business and establish myself as one of Denver's most sought-after sound engineers. "Understanding," I repeated slowly. This guitar was everything Grandpa Jake taught me about music, about life, about perseverance, and Tommy just destroyed it for fun. "You're supposed to forgive," Sarah said firmly, crossing her arms. "That's what family does. We forgive each other's mistakes and move on. Isn't that right, Mom? Mom nodded again, clearly uncomfortable with the tension, but siding with Sarah as she always did. Nelson, sweetheart, I know you loved that guitar, but Tommy is your nephew. Family comes first, and holding grudges over material possessions just isn't healthy. Tommy giggled and made another swinging motion with the bat. It made really cool sounds when it broke, like in the movies. The casual cruelty of that statement hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't innocent childhood curiosity. This was deliberate destruction, and my family was not only excusing it, but celebrating it as some kind of learning experience. Jessica moved closer to me, her hand finding mine in a gesture of support. Nelson has every right to be upset, she said calmly but firmly. This wasn't just expensive equipment. It was a family heirloom with deep sentimental value. Oh, please, Sarah scoffed. Nelson's always been dramatic about his music stuff. Remember when we were kids and he wouldn't let anyone touch his guitar picks? Some things never change. Dad cleared his throat uncomfortably. Maybe we should all just calm down and figure out how to handle this reasonably. These things happen in families. These things happen. I stared at my father in disbelief. Dad, someone just destroyed $10,000 worth of irreplaceable family history, and you're calling it one of those things. The guitar can probably be fixed, Mom suggested hopefully. Maybe it's not as bad as it looks. Jessica knelt down and carefully examined the broken neck. I'm sorry, Mrs. Patterson, but this is completely beyond repair. The neck is snapped through the truss rod and the body has multiple stress fractures. This guitar is destroyed. Sarah's expression shifted subtly, and for just a moment I caught something that looked almost like satisfaction flickering across her features. Well, that's unfortunate. But accidents happen. The important thing is that nobody got hurt. Nelson, you need to put this in perspective and remember what really matters. What really matters, I said quietly, is that my nephew just destroyed something priceless that belonged to our grandfather, and instead of teaching him about respect and consequences, you're all telling me I should be grateful for the experience. Tommy swung his bat again this time, connecting with one of the scattered guitar strings and sending it flying across the room. He burst into delighted laughter. Did you see that it went really far? The sound of that laughter, combined with my family's continued dismissal of what had happened, created a moment of perfect clarity. I realized that this wasn't just about a broken guitar. This was about respect, accountability, and the fundamental values that should govern how family members treat each other. But instead of arguing further, I simply nodded slowly and began gathering up the pieces of my grandfather's guitar. You're right, I said quietly. Tommy's just a child, and children need to learn through experience. I understand completely. Sarah looked surprised by my sudden agreement, but pleased. I'm glad you're being reasonable about this, Nelson. That's the mature response. Absolutely. I continued, carefully placing fragments of the guitar into a box. Children should be encouraged to explore and touch things even if they don't understand the consequences. It's all part of their natural development. Jessica gave me a concerned look, clearly sensing something beneath my calm acceptance, but I just smiled reassuringly and continued cleaning up the destruction. My family seemed satisfied that I had finally come to my senses and accepted their perspective on the situation. What they didn't realize was that I had indeed learned something valuable from this experience. I had learned exactly how my family viewed respect, consequences, and the difference between accidents and deliberate actions. Most importantly, I had learned that sometimes the most effective lessons are the ones you teach without saying a word. Tommy continued playing with his bat while the adults congratulated themselves on resolving the conflict so reasonably. But as I looked at my nephew's carefree destruction of my most precious possession, I couldn't help but think that he was exactly the right age to learn about natural consequences through hands-on experience. After all, as Sarah had so eloquently explained, that's just how children learn best. The next morning I woke up with a crystal-clear mission. Instead of dwelling on the emotional devastation, I decided to understand exactly how Tommy had gained access to my locked music room. My home studio was equipped with professional-grade security, including cameras that recorded everything 24 hours a day for insurance purposes. If this had been a deliberate act, there would be evidence. I spent my Sunday morning reviewing footage from the past month, fast-forwarding through hours of empty rooms and routine maintenance visits. What I discovered made my stomach turn. There, captured in high-definition digital clarity, was my sister Sarah, leading Tommy through my house not once, not twice, but 3 separate times over the past 6 weeks. The first visit had occurred on a Tuesday evening when I was downtown recording vocals for a local band's album. Sarah used a key to enter through my front door, then spent 20 minutes showing Tommy around my studio. I watched in growing disbelief as she pointed out various instruments and encouraged him to touch everything. She even lifted him up to reach my vintage Fender Stratocaster hanging on the wall mount. The second visit was more disturbing. Sarah arrived with Tommy on a Thursday afternoon, bringing along a small bag that I couldn't identify from the camera angle. This time, Tommy spent nearly an hour in my studio while Sarah filmed him with her phone. I watched my nephew deliberately scratch the surface of my Stratocaster with what appeared to be a metal object from Sarah's bag. When he looked uncertain about continuing, Sarah nodded encouragingly and made gestures that clearly said, "Keep going." But the third visit was the most shocking. Just 5 days before the barbecue, Sarah brought Tommy over during my Wednesday evening recording session downtown. This time, she came prepared with multiple items: spray bottles, sticky substances, and what looked like small tools. I watched in horror as Tommy poured some kind of cola directly into my mixing board while Sarah recorded the entire event, laughing silently at the destruction. The audio pickup was sensitive enough to capture their conversation during this visit. "Remember Tommy?" Sarah's voice came through my speakers with perfect clarity. "Uncle Nelson spends too much money on these toys instead of thinking about family. Grandpa Jake should have left some of these things to our whole family, not just to him." Tommy's young voice responded eagerly, "Can I break more stuff, Mom? This is fun." "Just have fun exploring, sweetheart. Sometimes people need to learn lessons about sharing and thinking about others instead of being selfish with their possessions." I sat back in my desk chair feeling physically sick. This wasn't childhood curiosity or accidental damage. This was a calculated campaign of destruction, planned and executed by my own sister using her son as the weapon. The broken guitar had been the culmination of weeks of deliberate sabotage. But the evidence got even worse. I discovered additional footage showing Sarah taking pictures of the damaged equipment, clearly documenting each instance of destruction. She spent time teaching Tommy how to hide evidence and clean up after himself so the damage wouldn't be immediately obvious. My phone rang, interrupting my investigation. Jessica's name appeared on the screen and I answered immediately. "Good morning," she said warmly. "I've been thinking about yesterday and something about the whole situation bothered me all night. The way Tommy was swinging that bat looked practiced, like he'd done it before." "You're more right than you know," I replied grimly. "I've been reviewing my security footage and what I found is going to shock you." I spent the next 30 minutes walking Jessica through each recorded incident, explaining the timeline and showing her the clear evidence of premeditated destruction. Her background working with children made her particularly good at interpreting the behavioral patterns we were observing. "Nelson, this is serious," Jessica said after reviewing everything. "What you're showing me isn't normal childhood behavior. Tommy's been trained to destroy your property, and Sarah has been documenting it like some kind of trophy collection." "The question is why," I said. "What could possibly motivate my sister to orchestrate something this elaborate and cruel?" "I might have some insight into that," Jessica replied carefully. "Yesterday, after you went inside to clean up the guitar pieces, I overheard Sarah talking to your cousin Beth. They were discussing some kind of inheritance issue, and Sarah seemed really bitter about something your grandfather left specifically to you." My blood ran cold. "What exactly did you hear?" Sarah was complaining that your grandfather played favorites by leaving all his musical equipment to you instead of dividing it among the grandchildren. She said something about how the family could have used that money for Tommy's education and other practical purposes. Beth tried to defend your grandfather's decision, but Sarah got really angry and said you didn't deserve special treatment just because you played music. The pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. Grandpa Jake had indeed left his entire musical estate to me, including 6 vintage guitars, professional amplifiers, recording equipment, and a collection of rare music memorabilia. The total value was probably close to $50,000, but I had never considered selling any of it because the sentimental value was immeasurable. There's something else, Jessica continued. After Sarah thought everyone had gone inside, I saw her showing videos on her phone to some other family members. They were all watching something and laughing, and I heard Sarah say something about teaching you a lesson about being more grateful and family-oriented. She was showing them footage of Tommy destroying my equipment, I realized with growing anger. She's been treating this like entertainment, documenting my nephew's destruction of irreplaceable family heirlooms and sharing it with relatives as some kind of joke. I spent the rest of Sunday copying all the security footage to multiple backup drives and organizing the evidence chronologically. Every conversation, every instance of destruction, every moment of Sarah's encouragement and documentation was preserved in perfect digital clarity. Monday morning, I called my parents and asked them to meet me for coffee to discuss the situation privately. I brought my laptop and external drives, hoping they would be willing to review the evidence objectively. Nelson, honey, I thought we settled this yesterday, Mom said as we sat down at their favorite diner. Tommy didn't mean any harm, and holding grudges just isn't healthy for family relationships. Mom, Dad, I need you to watch something before we talk about forgiveness or moving on. I opened my laptop and began playing the footage chronologically. This is security camera video from my house over the past 6 weeks. For the next hour, I walked them through every documented instance of Sarah's planned destruction campaign. I showed them Tommy's systematic vandalism, Sarah's encouragement and filming, and the clear audio evidence of their conversations about teaching me lessons and punishing me for inheriting Grandpa Jake's musical legacy. Dad's face grew increasingly grim as the evidence mounted. This is deliberate, he said quietly. Sarah brought him there specifically to damage your property. And she's been treating it like a game, Mom added, looking horrified. Recording it, laughing about it. Oh, Nelson, I had no idea. Yesterday, when you all told me to forgive and forget, Sarah already knew this had been going on for weeks. She's been using Tommy to systematically destroy my inheritance while pretending it was innocent childhood exploration. Mom reached across the table and took my hand. Sweetheart, I am so sorry. When I saw that broken guitar yesterday, I thought it really was just an accident. I never imagined that Sarah would plan something like this. The question is, what do we do now? Dad asked. This goes way beyond family disagreements. Sarah has been deliberately destroying your property and manipulating Tommy into criminal behavior. Right now, I just need you both to understand what really happened, I replied. Yesterday, you asked me to forgive and move on. But forgiveness has to be based on truth, and the truth is that my sister has been conducting a calculated campaign to hurt me emotionally and financially. We need to confront her with this evidence, Mom said firmly. Sarah needs to understand that what she's done is completely unacceptable. And we need to address Tommy's behavior, Dad added. He's being taught that destroying other people's property is acceptable, even entertaining. That's going to cause serious problems for him if it continues. I closed my laptop and looked at my parents seriously. I appreciate that you're willing to see the truth now, but before we decide how to handle this, there's something else you need to know. Yesterday, Sarah didn't just dismiss Tommy's destruction of my guitar. She used it as an opportunity to lecture me about forgiveness and family values while knowing full well that she had orchestrated the entire situation. What are you saying? Mom asked. I'm saying that Sarah's corruption of this situation goes deeper than just destroying my property. She's been manipulating our entire family using your love for Tommy and your desire for family harmony to protect herself from consequences, while she systematically attacks everything Grandpa Jake left me." Dad shook his head slowly. "I can't believe Sarah would do something this manipulative and cruel." "The evidence is right there," I said, gesturing to my laptop. "And yesterday proved that she's perfectly willing to stand by and watch the family attack me for being upset about something she planned and executed." As we sat in that diner processing the full scope of Sarah's betrayal, I realized that my approach to this situation needed to be just as calculated and thoughtful as hers had been. She had spent weeks planning her attack on my inheritance and using my nephew as her weapon. Now it was time for me to plan my response just as carefully. After all, as Sarah herself had said, sometimes people need to learn lessons about consequences and thinking about others instead of being selfish. The only difference was that my lesson was going to be much more immediate and much more memorable. Tuesday evening brought an unexpected phone call from my cousin Beth, Sarah's closest friend since childhood. Her voice sounded strained and uncomfortable, like someone wrestling with a difficult decision. "Nelson, I need to tell you something, and I probably should have said this months ago," she began hesitantly. "It's about Sarah and the whole situation with your grandfather's inheritance." I settled into my favorite chair, sensing that Beth had crucial information. "What is it, Beth?" "Whatever you know, I need to hear it." "Do you remember our family wedding last month? My sister Amanda's ceremony in Colorado Springs?" "Of course. Great party, beautiful venue." "Well, during the reception, I was in the ladies' room when Sarah came in with some of her country club friends. They didn't realize I was in one of the stalls, and I overheard a conversation that made me really uncomfortable." Beth paused, clearly struggling with whether to continue. "Sarah was bragging to these women about how she was going to fix what she called your inheritance problem. She said that Grandpa Jake had been senile and manipulated by you into leaving everything to the family musician instead of thinking about practical family needs." My grip tightened on the phone. "Go on?" One of her friends asked what she meant by fix, and Sarah laughed and said she was going to make sure you learned to share family resources instead of hoarding everything for yourself. She said something about teaching you that family obligations come before personal collections. "Did she mention Tommy specifically?" "That's the worst part," Beth said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Sarah told these women that she had been bringing Tommy to your house to explore your music room, and that children naturally break things when they're learning about the world. She said it was actually good for Tommy to understand that material possessions aren't sacred, and good for you to learn about letting go of attachment." I felt my anger building, but I kept my voice steady. "Anything else?" Sarah showed them videos on her phone. I couldn't see the screen from where I was, but I could hear the women laughing and making comments about expensive toys being wasted on people who don't appreciate family responsibilities. One woman said something about how musicians are always selfish with money, and Sarah agreed enthusiastically. "Beth, why didn't you tell me this sooner?" I kept hoping I had misunderstood, or that Sarah would come to her senses before anything serious happened. I never imagined she would actually encourage Tommy to destroy something as valuable and meaningful as Grandpa Jake's guitar. After ending the call with Beth, I sat in my living room processing this new information. The destruction of my inherited instruments wasn't just about jealousy or resentment. Sarah had been conducting a deliberate campaign to force me to share Grandpa Jake's legacy by making it too expensive and emotionally painful for me to keep. Wednesday morning brought another revelation. I was reviewing insurance paperwork for my damaged equipment when I discovered something that made my blood boil. Several of the insurance claims for previous damage to my studio equipment had been filed not by me, but by someone using my forged signature. I immediately called my insurance agent, Monica Rodriguez, who had been handling my accounts for over 5 years. "Nelson, I was wondering when you'd call about these recent claims," Monica said. "Some of the paperwork looked a little unusual, but the damages were consistent with the coverage levels you'd purchased." "Monica, I never filed any recent claims. What exactly are you talking about?" "Over the past 2 months, we've paid out nearly $8,000 for damage to various pieces of your recording equipment." mixing board repairs, guitar, refinishing amplifier maintenance. The claims were all properly documented with photos and repair estimates. I felt the world spinning around me. Monica, I never filed those claims and I never received any insurance money. Someone has been filing false claims using my identity. That's impossible, Nelson. We have your signature on all the paperwork and the payments were deposited into the bank account on file for your policy. What bank account? After a tense hour of investigation, Monica and I discovered that someone had changed my insurance payout account to a checking account I had never seen before. The forged signatures were good enough to pass casual inspection, but under closer scrutiny, they clearly weren't my handwriting. More disturbing was the pattern of claims. Each one corresponded exactly to damage I had discovered in my studio over the past 2 months. Someone had been documenting Tommy's destruction, filing insurance claims for the damage, and pocketing the money while telling my family that I was being fully compensated for all losses. Monica, I need copies of every document related to these fraudulent claims, and I need you to flag my account for identity theft investigation. Of course, Nelson. But I have to ask, do you have any idea who might have access to your personal information and signatures? I thought about Sarah's real estate career, which required her to handle complex financial documents and contracts on a daily basis. She would definitely have the skills and knowledge necessary to forge insurance paperwork convincingly. Unfortunately, I think I know exactly who's responsible. That evening, Jessica came over for dinner, and I shared the latest discoveries about the insurance fraud. She listened with growing amazement and anger. Nelson, this is so much worse than we thought. Sarah hasn't just been destroying your property for emotional revenge. She's been stealing from you financially while manipulating your family into thinking you're being greedy and unreasonable. The sick part is how calculating it's been, I replied. Every time Tommy broke something, Sarah filed an insurance claim and collected the money. Then, when I got upset about the destruction, she could point out that insurance was covering the financial losses, making me look like I cared more about sentimental attachment than practical reality. But your family doesn't know about the insurance fraud. Exactly. From their perspective, I was getting fully compensated for any damage while complaining about Tommy's innocent childhood exploration. Sarah has been playing both sides, stealing money from the insurance fraud while using my emotional reactions to make me look unreasonable. Jessica shook her head in disbelief. This isn't just sibling rivalry or jealousy. This is systematic theft and emotional manipulation. Sarah has been running a long-term con game against you using Tommy as her cover. And she almost got away with it. If Tommy hadn't destroyed the guitar in front of everyone, I might never have thought to check the security footage or investigate the insurance angle. What's your next move? Jessica asked. I looked out my window at the Denver skyline, thinking about my sister's calculated cruelty and my family's unwitting participation in her scheme. Sarah taught me an important lesson about how children learn through natural consequences and hands-on experience. I think it's time to apply that educational philosophy in a more practical setting. What do you mean? Tommy isn't the only one in that family who needs to learn about cause and effect, and Sarah's husband Marcus has something that's just as precious to him as Grandpa Jake's guitar was to me. Jessica gave me a concerned look. Nelson, whatever you're thinking, please be careful. I don't want this situation to escalate into something that could cause legal problems for you. Don't worry, I assured her. I'm just going to use Sarah's own educational philosophy. After all, she's been very clear about how people learn best through direct experience and natural consequences. I wouldn't want to deprive her family of such valuable learning opportunities. Promise me you won't do anything that could get you in trouble. I promise that everything I do will be completely consistent with the educational principles Sarah has been teaching our family. In fact, I'm going to make sure Tommy gets the most hands-on learning experience of his life. As Jessica and I finished dinner, I realized that my sister's betrayal had actually given me a perfect blueprint for justice. She had spent months teaching Tommy that exploration and curiosity should be encouraged, that breaking things is a natural part of childhood learning, and that families should forgive and support each other through mistakes. Now it was time to see how well those principles worked when applied to something Sarah and Marcus actually cared about. After all, the best way to teach important life lessons is through direct, memorable experience. And I had a feeling that this particular lesson was going to be very memorable indeed. Thursday morning, I began my research on Marcus and Sarah's most prized possessions. Marcus owned Denver Premium Motors, a luxury car dealership that specialized in high-end European vehicles. His personal pride and joy was a pristine $200,000 Mercedes-AMG GT that he had custom-ordered with every available option. I spent the day observing Marcus's routines from a discreet distance. Every morning at exactly 7:30, he arrived at his dealership and parked the Mercedes in a special covered area behind the main showroom. The car was treated like a museum piece, protected by a custom-fitted cover and surrounded by orange cones to prevent other vehicles from parking too close. Marcus spent at least 30 minutes each morning inspecting and detailing his Mercedes, checking tire pressure, cleaning microscopic dust particles from the paint, and ensuring that every surface maintained showroom perfection. He repeated this ritual every evening before driving home, treating the car like a sacred object that required constant worship and protection. Friday evening, I attended another family gathering at my parents' house, ostensibly to apologize for my reaction to the guitar incident and to rebuild family harmony. Sarah seemed pleased by my apparent change of attitude. "I'm glad you've come to understand Tommy's perspective," she said warmly as we stood in the kitchen preparing dinner. "Children need to explore and experience the world directly, even if it sometimes leads to accidents." "You're absolutely right," I agreed enthusiastically. "Direct experience is much more valuable than just talking about consequences. Tommy learns best by touching and investigating things himself." "Exactly. That's exactly what I've been trying to tell everyone. Tommy is naturally curious, and that curiosity should be encouraged, not discouraged." I nodded thoughtfully. It's such a healthy approach to childhood development. When kids are brave enough to really explore their environment, they develop confidence and understanding that lecture-based education just can't provide. Sarah beamed with satisfaction. "I'm so happy you finally understand Tommy is at the perfect age to learn through hands-on experience." During dinner, I made sure to spend quality time with Tommy, asking him about his interests and activities. He was surprisingly eager to talk about his recent explorations in my music room. "Uncle Nelson, I liked touching all your stuff," Tommy said between bites of his hamburger. "Mom said I was being really brave to touch things even when they looked scary." "That's wonderful, Tommy. Your mom is very smart about how children learn best. She said you have lots of expensive things because you don't think about sharing with family," Tommy continued innocently. "But it was fun to touch everything anyway." Sarah's face flushed slightly, but she quickly recovered. "Tommy, you shouldn't repeat private conversations. Eat your dinner." "It's okay," I said calmly. "Tommy's just sharing his thoughts honestly. That's exactly what children should do." After dinner, I found an opportunity to speak privately with Marcus about his car collection. He was more than happy to discuss his Mercedes in exhaustive detail. "That AMG GT represents everything I've worked for," Marcus explained proudly. "Custom paint, hand-stitched leather interior performance modifications that cost more than most people make in a year. It's not just transportation, it's a work of art." "It sounds incredible. I'd love to see it sometime." "Absolutely. I keep it at the dealership during the week, but weekends I usually have it here at the house. In fact, I'll probably bring it over for Sunday dinner so everyone can appreciate the craftsmanship." Saturday, I spent time with Tommy at a local park, ostensibly to build our uncle-nephew relationship, while actually conducting subtle education about exploration and curiosity. I was careful to use exactly the same language and principles Sarah had been teaching him. "Tommy, your mom is right about exploring being important for learning," I told him as we sat on the park swings. "Sometimes adults get scared when children touch things, but that's just because they don't understand how brave and curious kids need to be." Tommy nodded enthusiastically. Mom says some people are too worried about their stuff getting broken, but kids need to touch things to learn about them. That's very wise, and when something accidentally gets broken during exploration, adults should understand that it's just part of the learning process, right? Right, Mom says accidents happen when kids are being curious, and grown-ups should be happy that kids are being brave instead of mad about broken stuff. Your mom is very smart. What kinds of things do you like to explore most? I like things with buttons and switches, Tommy said excitedly. Mom lets me press buttons in her car sometimes, and I really like seeing what they do. That sounds like excellent. Learning buttons and switches are perfect for understanding how things work. Sunday arrived with perfect weather for my parents' weekly family dinner. As promised, Marcus brought his pristine Mercedes and parked it in their driveway like a gleaming sculpture. The car was absolutely stunning, with custom metallic paint that shifted colors in the sunlight and chrome details that reflected like mirrors. During cocktails on the patio, I made sure to admire Marcus's pride and joy extensively. Marcus, that Mercedes is genuinely beautiful. The craftsmanship is incredible. Thank you. It took 8 months to get all the custom work completed, but it was worth every penny and every day of waiting. I bet Tommy would be fascinated by all those sophisticated features. Kids his age are so naturally curious about complex machinery. Marcus looked uncertain. Well, it's pretty delicate. The electronics alone cost more than $30,000. Of course, but Tommy is such a careful, thoughtful child. Sarah's done an amazing job teaching him to explore responsibly. Sarah overheard our conversation and joined us proudly. Tommy is very good with mechanical things. He loves learning about how cars work. Maybe after dinner Tommy could see the Mercedes up close, I suggested casually, just to satisfy his natural curiosity about engineering and design. That's a wonderful idea, Sarah agreed immediately. Tommy would learn so much from seeing real craftsmanship and quality construction. Marcus still seemed hesitant, but Sarah's enthusiasm and my apparent support for Tommy's educational development convinced him to agree. I suppose a quick look wouldn't hurt as long as he's supervised. As we moved inside for dinner, I felt a calm sense of anticipation. Everything was falling into place exactly as I had planned. Sarah had spent months teaching Tommy that exploration should be encouraged, that touching things was natural for curious children, and that adults should prioritize learning experiences over concern for material possessions. Tonight, Tommy was going to receive the most comprehensive hands-on education of his young life, and Sarah was going to discover exactly how her parenting philosophy worked when applied to something she and Marcus actually valued. The lesson was about to begin, and I had a feeling it was going to be much more memorable than anything Tommy had learned in my music room. After all, the best education happens through direct personal experience. Sarah had taught me that herself. After dinner, as the adults lingered over coffee and dessert, I suggested that Tommy and I step outside to examine Marcus's Mercedes more closely. The late afternoon sun was casting golden light across the car's custom paint job, making it look even more spectacular than usual. "Would you like to see something really amazing, Tommy?" I asked, using the same encouraging tone Sarah had employed when introducing him to my music room. Tommy nodded eagerly, his eyes wide with curiosity as we approached the gleaming vehicle. "This car has some of the most sophisticated technology in the world," I explained, walking slowly around the Mercedes with Tommy following closely. "Everything you see here represents incredible engineering and craftsmanship." Marcus had left the car unlocked, confident that his family gathering was a safe environment for his prized possession. I guided Tommy to the driver's side door and gently pulled it open, revealing the luxurious interior with its hand-stitched leather seats and complex dashboard display. "Wow!" Tommy exclaimed, immediately drawn to the array of button switches and electronic displays. "It's like a spaceship inside." "You're absolutely right. And just like your mom always says, the best way to learn about things is through direct exploration and hands-on experience." I stepped back slightly, giving Tommy space to satisfy his natural curiosity while maintaining the same supervisory distance Sarah had used during his visits to my music room. Can I touch the buttons? Tommy asked, already reaching toward the dashboard. Your mom has always encouraged you to explore and learn through touching. Hasn't she? She believes children should investigate things that interest them. Tommy climbed into the driver's seat with the confidence Sarah had been building in him over months of encouraged exploration. He immediately began pressing various buttons on the center console, delighting in the electronic responses each press generated. The first few buttons were relatively harmless interior lights, radio presets, air conditioning adjustments. But Marcus's Mercedes was equipped with an incredibly complex array of electronic systems, and Tommy's random exploration quickly escalated to more significant controls. This button made a beeping sound. Tommy announced happily, pressing the hazard light control repeatedly. That's excellent observation, Tommy. You're learning how different systems respond to input. Keep exploring. Tommy's enthusiasm grew as he discovered more buttons and switches. He activated the seat adjustment controls, sending the driver's seat sliding forward and backward in sharp mechanical jerks. He found the window controls and began cycling them up and down rapidly, enjoying the smooth mechanical sounds. Uncle Nelson, look at this. Tommy had discovered the steering wheel controls and was pressing every button within reach. The dashboard display began cycling through different screens and menus as various electronic systems responded to his random inputs. You're doing exactly what curious children should do, I assured him, maintaining my encouraging tone while carefully staying far enough away to avoid any appearance of direct participation. Your mom always says that hands-on learning is the most effective way to understand how things work. Tommy found the gear shift controls and began experimenting with different positions. The Mercedes' sophisticated electronic transmission responded to each change, producing subtle mechanical sounds that fascinated him. He discovered that holding certain combinations of buttons created different responses, treating the entire dashboard like an incredibly complex puzzle. This is so cool, it's like a video game, but real. 20 minutes into Tommy's exploration, I began hearing raised voices from inside the house. Sarah and Marcus were apparently having some kind of disagreement, but I couldn't make out the specific words. I decided this provided perfect cover for Tommy's continued educational experience. Tommy, you're doing such a good job learning about engineering and technology. Your mom would be so proud of how brave and curious you're being. Can I try this one? Tommy pointed to a cluster of buttons near the emergency brake. Remember what your mom always says, children learn best when they're allowed to explore freely and discover how things work through their own investigation. Tommy pressed several buttons simultaneously, and suddenly the Mercedes' complex electronic systems began responding in ways that were clearly not intended by the original designers. Warning lights appeared on the dashboard, accompanied by electronic chimes and beeps that grew increasingly urgent. Oh, Tommy said, but he was still smiling. I think I broke something. Don't worry, I reassured him, using exactly the same tone Sarah had used when addressing Tommy's destruction in my music room. Sometimes things get damaged during exploration, but that's just part of how children learn. The important thing is that you're being curious and investigating how the world works. Tommy continued his exploration with renewed confidence, pressing buttons and switches with increasing enthusiasm. The Mercedes electronic systems were clearly struggling to process the random inputs, and several warning messages began appearing on the dashboard display. Uncle Nelson, the car is making lots of beeping sounds now. That just means you're really learning about complex systems, Tommy. Keep exploring. At that moment, Marcus appeared in the doorway, having apparently resolved whatever discussion he'd been having with Sarah. He took one look at the scene in his driveway and let out a sound I'd never heard from another human being. What is happening to my car? Tommy looked up from his exploration with a bright smile. Hi, Mr. Marcus. I'm learning about buttons and switches. Uncle Nelson said I should keep exploring. Marcus rushed toward his Mercedes, his face cycling through multiple shades of red and purple. Get him out of there. Get him away from my car. Now, Marcus, I said calmly, Tommy's just being naturally curious. Children learn best through hands-on experience, and you agreed that he could examine your car. I said he could look at it, not destroy the electronics. Sarah appeared behind Marcus, followed by my parents and Jessica. The entire family gathered around the Mercedes as Marcus frantically tried to assess the damage Tommy had accomplished through his educational exploration. "What seems to be the problem?" Sarah asked, clearly not understanding the severity of the situation. "Your son has been randomly pressing every button and switch in my car for the past 20 minutes, Marcus shouted. "The electronic systems are completely confused. Warning lights are everywhere. The dashboard computer is stuck in some kind of diagnostic loop." Tommy climbed out of the car proudly. "I learned so much. There are buttons that make lights, and buttons that make sounds, and buttons that make the seats move." Tommy was just exploring and learning. I explained to the assembled family, maintaining the same calm tone Sarah had used during the guitar incident. He was being curious about engineering and technology, exactly the way children should be encouraged to investigate their environment. "This is different," Marcus sputtered. "This car cost $200,000. The electronics alone are worth more than most people's houses." "Now, Marcus," Sarah said, finally finding her voice. "Tommy didn't mean any harm. He was just being curious about how things work. Children need to explore to learn." "Curious your son just destroyed $30,000 worth of precision electronics." "Oh, come on," I said gently. "These things happen when children are learning. Tommy was just following his natural instincts to investigate and understand complex systems. Isn't that exactly what we want to encourage in young people?" Marcus stared at me with absolute fury. "Are you insane? This isn't a learning experience. This is destruction." "Marcus, calm down," Sarah interrupted. "It's just a car. Tommy is more important than any material possession. You should be focusing on the fact that he was being brave enough to explore something new instead of worrying about mechanical problems." "Just a car." Marcus's voice cracked with emotion. "This car represents everything I've worked for. It's custom-built, one of a kind. The repairs alone will cost more than most people make in a year." "Well," I said thoughtfully, "insurance should cover most of the damage. And really the most important thing is that Tommy had a valuable learning experience. That's what families should prioritize: education and growth over material concerns." Tommy, still beaming with pride over his successful exploration, piped up cheerfully, "Can I explore more cars, Mom? This was really fun." The expression on Marcus's face at that moment was something I will remember for the rest of my life. It was the exact same look I must have had when I discovered Tommy standing over the wreckage of my grandfather's guitar. The look of someone watching their most precious possession being treated as an expendable learning tool. Sarah, however, seemed to be finally grasping the magnitude of what had happened. "Marcus, I mean, surely the car can be fixed, right? It's not like Tommy actually broke anything important." "Not broke anything important." Marcus turned to stare at his wife with incredulous rage. "Sarah, your son just turned a $200,000 precision machine into a malfunctioning pile of confused electronics. The repair cost alone will be astronomical, assuming it can even be fixed." "But he's just a child," Sarah said weakly. "Children don't understand the value of things. They learn through touching and experiencing." "Then maybe," Marcus said with deadly calm, "it's time for this particular child to learn about consequences." And that was the moment when I realized that my lesson had been even more effective than I had planned. Because Sarah was about to discover that her philosophy of consequence-free exploration sounded very different when it was being applied to something she actually cared about. The next few minutes unfolded like a perfectly orchestrated symphony of justice. Marcus stood over his damaged Mercedes, frantically pressing buttons and trying to reset the confused electronic systems, while Sarah attempted to minimize the situation using the exact same arguments she had deployed after Tommy destroyed my guitar. "Marcus, you're overreacting," Sarah said with diminishing confidence. "It's just mechanical problems. Cars can be fixed. The important thing is that nobody got hurt and Tommy learned something valuable about engineering." "Overreacting." Marcus's voice reached a pitch I didn't think was physically possible for adult human males. Sarah, your son just destroyed the most sophisticated automotive electronics package money can buy. The dashboard computer is stuck in permanent diagnostic mode. The transmission won't shift properly. Half the warning systems are firing simultaneously. But it's insured, right? Sarah asked hopefully. These kinds of accidents happen, and that's what insurance is for. Marcus stared at his wife with an expression of pure horror. Insurance. Sarah, this isn't accident coverage. Tommy deliberately pressed every button he could reach for 20 minutes straight. That's not an accident. That's systematic destruction. He was exploring, Sarah protested. Children explore by touching things. It's completely natural behavior. Natural behavior doesn't cost $30,000 to repair you. My father stepped forward, clearly recognizing the parallels between this situation and the guitar incident. Sarah, maybe you should consider that Marcus feels the same way Nelson felt yesterday when Tommy broke his grandfather's guitar. That's completely different, Sarah snapped. This is just a car. Nelson's guitar was just sentimental attachment. This is just about money. Just money. Marcus turned to face his wife fully, and for the first time I saw real rage in his eyes. Sarah, this car isn't just money. It's everything I've worked for. It's the symbol of every successful deal, every satisfied customer, every 16-hour day I've put in building my business. You're being dramatic, Sarah said, but her voice was shaking now. It's a material possession. Family should come first, and holding grudges over things just isn't healthy. Marcus laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that makes everyone nearby feel uncomfortable. Ugh, family comes first, Sarah. Do you know what this car represents? It represents Tommy's college fund. It represents our mortgage payments. It represents our financial security. And your son just turned it into a $30,000 repair bill for the fun of watching buttons light up. The repairs can't possibly cost that much, Sarah said desperately. Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed his dealership's service manager. Dave, it's Marcus. I need you to listen carefully because this is going to sound insane. He spent the next 10 minutes describing Tommy's random button-pressing exploration, while Dave apparently explained the potential damage to various electronic systems. When Marcus hung up, his face was pale. Dave says that random inputs to interconnected automotive systems can create cascading failures that require complete electronic replacement. We're looking at a minimum of $25,000, possibly as much as $40,000, depending on what systems were corrupted. That's impossible, Sarah whispered. And here's the best part, Marcus continued with bitter sarcasm. Our insurance specifically excludes coverage for damage caused by deliberate misuse or unauthorized operation. Since Tommy spent 20 minutes randomly activating systems, this falls under deliberate misuse. Sarah turned to me with sudden, desperate anger. This is your fault. You were supposed to be supervising him. You encouraged this. I did exactly what you did in Nelson's music room, I replied calmly. I maintained appropriate supervisory distance while encouraging Tommy's natural curiosity and exploration. I used the exact same educational philosophy you've been teaching our family. That's different. How is it different? Sarah, Tommy was investigating complex systems to satisfy his natural curiosity, just like you've been teaching him. I encouraged his exploration using the exact same words you used when he was destroying my grandfather's guitar. Jessica spoke up quietly from the edge of the group. Sarah Nelson is right. The only difference between this situation and the guitar situation is that this time it's your family's property being destroyed by Tommy's exploration. We'll sue, Sarah announced suddenly. Nelson was responsible for supervising Tommy. He's legally liable for this damage. Actually, my father said with lawyer-like precision. Nelson was doing exactly what you told our entire family was appropriate supervision. If you want to claim that his supervision was negligent, you'll have to acknowledge that your supervision yesterday was equally negligent. Marcus was staring at his wife with growing realization. Yesterday. What happened? Yesterday. Mom looked uncomfortable. Tommy accidentally broke Nelson's guitar during our family barbecue. It was very expensive and had sentimental value, but Sarah helped us understand that children need to explore and that families should prioritize forgiveness over material concerns. How expensive? Marcus asked quietly. $10,000, I replied. It was my grandfather's 1959 Gibson Les Paul Standard. Marcus turned to Sarah with absolute fury. You lectured me about overreacting to material damage while your son was destroying $10,000 family heirlooms. That was different, Sarah insisted. That was just Nelson being too attached to possessions. Just like I'm being too attached to our car. Marcus's voice was deadly calm now. Just like I should prioritize family harmony over the financial security that car represents. This isn't the same situation at all. You're right, Marcus agreed. It's not the same. Because Nelson's guitar was covered by insurance and our car isn't. The color drained from Sarah's face. What do you mean covered by insurance? Marcus looked at her with growing suspicion. Nelson would have filed insurance claims for the guitar damage, right? So he wasn't actually out any money, just sentimental attachment. Actually, I said quietly, that brings up an interesting point. Sarah, would you like to explain to Marcus how my insurance claims were handled? Sonis. Sarah's face went completely white. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do. I think Marcus deserves to know about the $8,000 in fraudulent insurance claims someone filed using my forged signature over the past 2 months. Marcus stared at his wife in growing horror. What is he talking about, Sarah? I have no idea. Nelson's obviously trying to change the subject because he knows he's responsible for our car damage. I pulled out my phone and showed Marcus the insurance documentation I had received from Monica Rodriguez. These are claims filed under my name for damage to my music equipment. Damage that was caused by Tommy during his previous exploration visits to my house. Claims that were filed with forged signatures and payments deposited to an account I never opened. Marcus studied the documents with the careful attention of someone who handled financial paperwork professionally. His face grew increasingly grim as he recognized his wife's signature style and handwriting patterns. Marenti said slowly, "These signatures look remarkably similar to your handwriting." That's ridiculous. Why would I forge insurance claims? Maybe, Marcus suggested with dangerous calm, for the same reason you've been encouraging Tommy to destroy Nelson's property while lecturing our family about the importance of forgiveness and family harmony over material concerns. Sarah realized that her carefully constructed narrative was collapsing completely. Marcus, you're being manipulated. Nelson planned this whole thing to make me look bad. Actually, Jessica said quietly, Nelson has security camera footage of all Tommy's previous visits to his house, including footage of you encouraging Tommy's destruction and filming it for your entertainment. What? Marcus turned to stare at his wife with absolute shock. That's not what happened, Sarah stammered. Then you won't mind if we all watch the footage together, I suggested. I have it right here on my phone. For the next 20 minutes, I showed my family the complete documentation of Sarah's calculated campaign against my inherited possessions. The footage of her bringing Tommy to my house, encouraging his destruction, filming his vandalism, and celebrating each instance of damage. Marcus watched in stunned silence as his wife's true character was revealed through her own recorded words and actions. When the presentation finished, he turned to Sarah with an expression I had never seen before. You've been systematically destroying your brother's property, filing fraudulent insurance claims, and manipulating our entire family to cover up your theft and vandalism, he said with deadly calm. And now you're trying to blame Nelson for the consequences of our son's behavior that you deliberately trained and encouraged. Marcus, I can explain everything. I don't think you can, Marcus replied, because what I just watched wasn't childish jealousy or family disagreement. What I watched was criminal fraud theft and the systematic corruption of our 12-year-old son into a weapon for your personal revenge. Sarah looked around the circle of family members desperately seeking support, but found only disappointed faces and uncomfortable silence. "We'll get through this together," she said weakly. "Families forgive each other and move on." "Yes," Marcus agreed thoughtfully. "Families do forgive each other, but first families need to face truth and accept consequences. And the truth is that you've been teaching our son that destruction is acceptable, theft is justifiable, and manipulation is how families solve problems. I was protecting our family interest. You were stealing money and destroying property while teaching our son to be a criminal," Marcus corrected. "And now we get to live with the consequences of your educational philosophy." Tommy, who had been listening to this entire conversation with growing confusion, finally spoke up. "Mom, did I do something wrong? Uncle Nelson said I was being good by exploring." The heartbreaking innocence of that question created a moment of perfect silence. Everyone in that driveway realized simultaneously that Tommy was the real victim of Sarah's manipulation. He had been trained to destroy property, taught to ignore consequences, and used as a weapon in an adult conflict he couldn't understand. "No, Tommy," I said gently. "You were doing exactly what your mom taught you to do, but sometimes adults teach children things that aren't good for them, and sometimes those lessons have consequences that hurt everyone." Marcus knelt down to Tommy's eye level. "Son, from now on, we're going to learn about asking permission before touching other people's property. And we're going to learn that our actions always have consequences even when we don't mean to cause problems." "Are you mad at me?" Tommy asked with genuine concern. "I'm not mad at you," Marcus assured him, "but I am very disappointed in the lessons you've been taught. And starting tomorrow, we're going to learn some new lessons about respect, responsibility, and thinking about how our actions affect other people." Sarah made one final desperate attempt to regain control of the situation. "This is all blown out of proportion. Families have disagreements and we'll work through this together, But Marcus was done listening to his wife's manipulation. "Sarah, we will work through this. But first you're going to return every penny you stole through fraudulent insurance claims. Then you're going to pay for the damage to my car. And then we're going to have a very long conversation about the kind of example you want to set for our son." "Where am I supposed to get $40,000? Marcus smiled without any warmth whatsoever. "I'm sure you'll think of something. After all, families need to prioritize financial responsibility over personal comfort. Right? Isn't that the lesson you've been teaching everyone else?" As the family gathering dissolved into uncomfortable conversations about consequences, accountability, and the need for some serious family counseling, I realized that my quiet lesson had been far more effective than I had ever imagined. Sarah had spent months teaching Tommy that actions don't have consequences, that adults should prioritize family harmony over personal property, and that exploration should be encouraged regardless of the damage it might cause. Now she was about to learn that those lessons work very differently when they're applied to situations she actually cares about. And Tommy was going to learn that the adults in his life had been teaching him some very unhealthy approaches to respecting other people and taking responsibility for his actions. Most importantly, my family was finally going to have honest conversations about fairness, respect, and the difference between supporting each other and enabling destructive behavior. The lesson was complete, and justice had been served with perfect poetic precision. 6 months later, my life had transformed in ways I never could have anticipated. The insurance investigation into Sarah's fraud had resulted in full restitution for all the damaged equipment plus penalties that funded a complete upgrade of my studio. My music business was thriving with word-of-mouth referrals, bringing in more clients than I could handle. The insurance investigator, Patricia Wells, had been amazed by the thoroughness of my documentation and the clear evidence of premeditated fraud. "In 22 years of investigating insurance crime, I've never seen such a systematic campaign," she told me during our final meeting. "Your security footage and financial records made this the easiest prosecution in department history." Sarah had been required to pay full restitution of $12,000 to the insurance company, plus an additional $15,000 in penalties and legal fees. The criminal charges were ultimately reduced to misdemeanor fraud in exchange for her full cooperation and agreement to undergo family counseling, but the financial impact had been devastating to her lifestyle. Marcus had been forced to sell his damaged Mercedes to a specialty repair shop for parts, taking a $60,000 loss that wiped out most of their savings account. The luxury car dealership was struggling with reduced sales due to economic pressures, and Marcus had been forced to take a second mortgage on their house to maintain business operations. But the most significant change had been in Tommy's behavior and attitude. Family counseling with Dr. Amanda Chen, a specialist in childhood behavioral development, had revealed the extent to which Tommy had been psychologically damaged by Sarah's encouragement of destructive behavior. Children need clear, consistent boundaries to develop healthy relationships with authority and property, Dr. Chen had explained during one of our joint sessions. When adults encourage destruction while simultaneously teaching children that consequences don't apply to them, it creates profound confusion about respect, responsibility, and empathy. Tommy was now attending weekly individual therapy sessions focused on understanding the difference between curiosity and destruction, learning to ask permission before touching other people's property, and developing genuine empathy for how his actions affected others. The transformation had been remarkable. 2 weeks ago, Tommy had visited my newly renovated studio to formally apologize for destroying my grandfather's guitar and to see the replacement instruments I had acquired. "Uncle Nelson," he had said with genuine remorse, "I understand now that your guitar wasn't just expensive money. It was like having a piece of Grandpa Jake with you, and I took that away forever." The sincerity in his voice had brought tears to my eyes. "Tommy, I forgive you completely, and I want you to know that you're always welcome to visit my studio as long as you ask permission before touching anything. Can I really, even after what I did? Especially after what you did. You've learned important lessons about respect and responsibility, and that makes you someone I can trust with my equipment." Tommy had spent 2 hours in my studio that day, carefully examining instruments with appropriate reverence and asking thoughtful questions about music and recording. At the end of the visit, I had given him a beginner's acoustic guitar and offered to teach him proper technique if he was interested in learning. "I would love that," Tommy had said, handling his new guitar with the care and respect I had always hoped to see from him. "But I want to learn the right way so I never hurt music again." Sarah's transformation had been more complex and painful. The family counseling sessions had forced her to confront the jealousy and resentment that had motivated her campaign against my inheritance, as well as the psychological damage she had inflicted on Tommy through her manipulation. I convinced myself that I was protecting Tommy from being too materialistic, Sarah admitted during a particularly difficult session. But the truth was that I resented Nelson for inheriting things I thought our family could have used for more practical purposes. "And how did that resentment manifest in your treatment of your brother?" Dr. Chen had asked. "I turned my son into a weapon," Sarah replied, finally acknowledging the full extent of her actions. "I taught him that destroying Nelson's property was acceptable, even entertaining, because I wanted to hurt Nelson emotionally and financially." The road to rebuilding trust between Sarah and me had been long and difficult, requiring months of honest conversation about our family dynamics and childhood resentments. But gradually, we had developed a relationship based on mutual respect rather than competition and manipulation. "Nelson, I owe you more than just money," Sarah had told me during a recent coffee meeting. "I stole your peace of mind, violated your trust, and corrupted my son's moral development because I couldn't handle my own jealousy and selfishness. Sarah, what matters most to me is that Tommy learns healthy boundaries and respect for others. If this experience helps him become a better person, then something good came from something terrible." "He talks about you constantly now," Sarah said with a mixture of pride and sadness. "He practices guitar every day, and he's been asking Marcus to teach him about how to properly care for valuable things. Dr. Chen says he's developing genuine empathy and responsibility for the first time in his life." Marcus and Sarah's marriage had survived the crisis, but only after months of counseling and fundamental changes in how they communicated about money, parenting, and family priorities. Marcus had ultimately forgiven Sarah's deception, but their relationship now included strict accountability measures and regular check-ins with Dr. Chen. The hardest part wasn't the financial loss, Marcus had explained during a family gathering. It was realizing that my wife had been manipulating our entire family while I was completely oblivious to what was happening. My parents had also undergone significant growth through family counseling, recognizing how their desire to avoid conflict had enabled Sarah's manipulation and hurt me in the process. We were so focused on keeping peace that we forgot about keeping justice, Mom had admitted. When you were upset about your guitar, we should have listened to your feelings instead of dismissing them to avoid family drama. Dad had been even more direct. Sarah took advantage of our love for Tommy and our desire for family harmony. We need to learn the difference between supporting family members and enabling destructive behavior. Jessica and I had grown closer through the entire experience, and she had been instrumental in helping me navigate the complex emotions of forgiveness and accountability. You handled that situation with incredible wisdom, Jessica told me recently. You found a way to teach Sarah and Tommy about consequences without descending into revenge or cruelty. I just applied her own educational philosophy, I replied. Sarah had been teaching Tommy that direct experience was more valuable than lectures about consequences. She was right about that, even if she didn't realize how that lesson would eventually apply to her own family. The most unexpected outcome had been the deepening of my relationship with Tommy. His genuine remorse and commitment to personal growth had transformed him from a destructive, manipulated child into one of my favorite people to spend time with. Tommy had been practicing guitar diligently for 4 months, and his natural musical ability was becoming apparent. Last week, he had played his first complete song for the family, a simple blues progression that would have made Grandpa Jake proud. Uncle Nelson, Tommy had said after finishing his performance, "Do you think Grandpa Jake would have liked my playing?" Tommy, I think Grandpa Jake would be amazed by how much you've learned and how hard you've worked, but most importantly, I think he would be proud of the young man you're becoming. I want to be good enough someday to play one of his songs on a guitar as nice as the one I broke. If you keep practicing and learning, I believe you will be. And when that day comes, I'll make sure you have access to an instrument worthy of your skills and your respect for music. The insurance money had allowed me to acquire several vintage instruments, including a 1958 Gibson Les Paul Standard that was remarkably similar to Grandpa Jake's original guitar. But more importantly, the experience had taught me valuable lessons about family dynamics, the importance of standing up for myself, and the difference between forgiveness and enabling. Dr. Chen had helped our entire family understand that healthy relationships require both compassion and accountability, both support and boundaries, both forgiveness and consequences. Families often confuse unconditional love with unconditional acceptance of destructive behavior, she had explained. True love sometimes requires setting firm boundaries and allowing people to experience the natural consequences of their actions. As I sat in my renovated studio this morning, preparing for a recording session with a promising young Denver band, I reflected on how much had changed since that terrible afternoon when I discovered Tommy standing over the wreckage of my grandfather's guitar. The most important lesson I had learned was that standing up for yourself doesn't damage family relationships. It strengthens them by forcing honest conversations about respect, responsibility, and mutual care. Sarah's manipulation had been possible only because our family had prioritized surface harmony over genuine understanding. Tommy knocked on my studio door, arriving for his weekly guitar lesson with his instrument case and a notebook where he carefully recorded everything I taught him. "Good morning, Uncle Nelson. I practiced the chord progression you showed me last week, and I think I'm ready to learn something new." "That's wonderful, Tommy. Let's see how you're doing with those changes, and then we'll work on some of Grandpa Jake's favorite blues techniques." Tommy's face lit up with genuine enthusiasm. "Really? You'll teach me Grandpa Jake's techniques? Absolutely. But remember, learning music is about more than just playing notes correctly. It's about respecting the instrument, understanding the tradition you're joining, and always remembering that music is a gift we share with others." "I understand," Tommy said seriously. "Music isn't just about me having fun. It's about being part of something bigger and more important." As Tommy carefully tuned his guitar and prepared for his lesson, I realized that the most satisfying outcome of this entire experience wasn't the justice that had been served or the money that had been recovered. It was seeing a young person transform from a manipulated, destructive child into someone capable of genuine respect, responsibility, and care for others. Sarah's campaign of destruction had ultimately created an opportunity for Tommy to learn invaluable lessons about consequences, empathy, and the importance of treating other people's property and feelings with appropriate reverence. Sometimes the most painful experiences in life create opportunities for the most meaningful growth. Tommy's destruction of my grandfather's guitar had been devastating, but it had also forced our entire family to confront unhealthy patterns and learn better ways of treating each other. As I watched Tommy carefully position his fingers on the fretboard and concentrate on producing clean, respectful sounds from his instrument, I thought about Grandpa Jake and how proud he would be to see his great-nephew learning not just musical techniques, but the deeper lessons about dedication, respect, and love that music can teach. The guitar may have been destroyed, but the legacy it represented was stronger than ever, passed on to a new generation through hard-earned wisdom about the importance of treating precious things with the care and reverence they deserve. So let me ask you this. Have you ever faced a situation where family members expected you to accept destructive behavior just to keep the peace? How do you balance forgiveness with accountability when someone you love crosses important boundaries? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe for more real-life stories about family challenges and personal growth, and share this video with anyone who might benefit from hearing about the importance of standing up for yourself while maintaining love and respect for family. Thank you for listening, and I hope this story helps you navigate your own family relationships with wisdom, strength, and compassion.